Good morning, ladies and gentlemen, and welcome to the September 2021 meeting of the California High-Speed Rail Authority's Board of Directors. Before we get started this morning, I wanted to make a short announcement. That is that for personal reasons, Director Andre Boutros has decided to tender his resignation from this board and did so to the Speaker Rendon, and the Speaker accepted it. Director Boutros provided experienced and valuable insight to this board and the authority. We thank you, Andre, for your service, and we'd like to let you know, as you would understand, you will be missed, and we wish you and your family well. Shortly thereafter, ladies and gentlemen, Speaker Rendon appointed Margaret Pena as his second appointee to this authority board, joining his appointee, Director Martha Escutia. With that, I'm going to ask our secretary to read the roll.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Director Schenk.
Present.
Chair Richards.
Here.
Director Camacho. I think you're muted, Director.
Here.
Vice Chair Miller.
Here.
Assembly Member Rambula. Director Perea.
Here.
Director Guillemetti.
Present.
Director Escutia.
Here.
Director Williams.
Here.
Director Pena.
Here.
Mr. Chairman, we have a quorum.
Thank you, Mr. Secretary. I'd like to make the members of the board aware that Director Pena has been sworn in and has received a copy of the agenda and the board package, and has rushed as rapidly as she can to assimilate all that information, and has been briefed by the staff. I join all the directors, Director Pena, in welcoming you to the board and look forward to working with you. Thank you for answering the call, and we'll get started with today's business.
Thank you. Very glad to be here.
If you would like, without any pressure, to make any comments to the board at this time, the floor is yours.
It's a pleasure to be here, and look forward to working with all of you.
Thank you. And we look forward to working with you also. Before we actually start with public comment, I wanted to just recognize for the board, and for actually on behalf of the board, for the public, that for the last 18 months, these broadcasts have come to you through the hard work of three people, two behind the scenes and one who is flipping back and forth behind the scenes and in front of the camera. Mo Ramadan, Justin Churka, I'm sorry, Justin, and Scott Waters. Thank all three of you. These are members of the authority, and we thank them. They have done a great job. I don't know how you've done it with the lack of experience we all had at the outset, but you've done it flawlessly. So thank all three of you guys.
Thank you. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
All right. Me too, Martha. Anyway, now, ladies and gentlemen, we will move to public comment, as we do at the beginning of all of our meetings. And to brief you on how you can address this board, I'm going to turn the meeting back over to our secretary. Please move forward, Mr. Secretary.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Good morning, all. Welcome to the California High-Speed Rail Board of Directors public meeting. Today, we are hosting this meeting remotely via the Zoom application. In a moment, we will take public comment. First, we want to run through some important technical aspects of this meeting for offering public comment. If you are logged into this meeting via the Zoom application, please use the raise your hand feature, typically located at the bottom of your screen, so that I can call on you to provide your comment. If you're dialing in by phone, pressing #2 will raise your hand and put you into our queue. Speakers will be called in the order that their hand is raised. Once you've been in the queue and your name is called, in the web meeting, please click the prompt on your screen to allow your microphone to be unmuted. On the phone, we will call on you by the last 4 digits of your phone number. At that point, you'll hear a message that you are being unmuted. Once unmuted, it'll be your turn to speak. Please slowly and clearly say and spell your first and last name, and if applicable, state the organization you represent. After your introduction, each speaker is allotted 2 minutes to provide their comment. I will interject at 1 minute and 45 seconds to provide a 15-second warning. Our court reporter is on the line to record these comments. If they need you to spell or repeat something, they may interject. I will notify you when your time is nearly up. At the end of your comment, we will disable your microphone. However, you are welcome to stay on the line to continue watching or listening to the meeting. If you do not wish to provide comment and simply want to watch the meeting, you can do so by logging on to hsr.ca.gov and looking for the link to our live stream. Mr. Chairman, first up for public comment, we have a David Schwagel.
Good morning, Mr. Schwagel.
Good morning. Can you hear me?
We hear you loud and clear.
Excellent. David, D-A-V-I-D, Schwegel, S-C-H-W-E-G-E-L, with the U.S. High-Speed Rail Association, congratulating Governor Gavin Newsom on surviving the recall by nearly 2-1. First State of the State address. We're going to put all those change orders online for everyone to see. Legislators erupt in applause. Next thing I know, I've accepted a job offer managing change orders on CP23. I immediately walked the halls of the Capitol and conducted a listening tour to get a full understanding of the concerns that the legislators had with regard to those change orders. And I gave them my word that to the extent that it depends on me and the CP23 change order management team, that we are going to rally the troops and get these change orders resolved as quickly as possible. One of the things that came out of my term as change order manager was a change order manager's manual with change order management best practices, which I will email to the board after today's meeting. I am also coordinating with the Institute of Transportation Engineers, Southern California section, on the inclusion of an article in the ITE Southern California section newsletter on the legislative advocacy for 20 high-speed rail projects of national significance, with a link to our project ranked #1. If we have not done so already, I highly recommend a memorandum of understanding with the Cascadia high-speed rail folks who were successful at getting tech to invest in their system. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Schwagel.
Mr. Chairman, next up for public comment, we have a Laura Erland Shane.
Good morning, Ms. Ferland-Jane.
Good morning. Can you hear me?
We hear you loud and clear. Thank you.
Excellent. So my name is Laura Berland Shane, and that's LauraBerland-Shane. And I'm calling you from Blue Planet Systems. We're located in Los Gatos, California. I was calling to express my urge you to consider the use of your supply chain to basically enable sequestration of CO2. There's an incredible opportunity to actually use concrete to sequester CO2 and thereby offset the CO2 emitted via cement production. We here at Blue Planet are building a plant in Pittsburgh, California, and we have a process to produce synthetic limestone using CO2 captured from flue gas emitted by polluters. And with regard to high-speed rail, as you know, 43% of aggregate is used in public works. And we believe that this solution is available now. And I would urge you to do some research on that, or contact us, because I do want to make the group aware that we can actually get into negative emissions and concrete that's carbon negative. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Ms. Berlanchini.
Mr. Chairman, next up for public comment, we have a John Williams.
Good morning, Mr. Williams.
Good morning, Mr. Chairman. My name is John Williams. That's spelled JOHNWILLIAMS. I'm the board chair at the Institute for Sustainable Infrastructure, or ISI, the force behind the Envision Sustainable Infrastructure Rating System. I want to recognize and congratulate the California High-Speed Rail Program Board, management, and staff leaders for taking bold steps on behalf of future generations of Californians who will benefit from your efforts to reduce air pollution, greenhouse gas emissions, and to encourage the use of renewable energy. There are many other public benefits associated with the system. I can think of none more important than the way your efforts will enhance connectivity between geographic areas and the people who make up California's economy. When we speak of infrastructure investments, I wish more people understood that access to water sustains life, energy powers commerce, the web that helps us learn and exchange information, and transportation infrastructure that enables the movement of opportunities from home to market to regional growth to competitive advantage. Your recognition with an Envision Platinum Award sends a serious message that you understand that your efforts are making a difference in creating a fair and vibrant world. That same world should be a place where people will want to live, work, learn, heal, and play. The increased connectivity you're providing will help those same people conduct their lives together. From my personal perspective, and this is just my personal opinion here, I live in New York and am a heavy user of regional rail. Pardon me?
15 seconds remaining.
Great. I live in New York and am a heavy user of regional rail and subway services. Prior to the pandemic, I made frequent trips to New York's Moynihan Station and Washington, D.C.'s Union Station. Your Envision Platinum status gives Amtrak and other transit providers a reason to watch closely.
Over the 2-minute time limit.
If you can just finish up in a couple seconds or so,
Yes,
Mr. Williams.
yes, sir. Seldom do we find massive economic shaping, technology pushing, and professional leadership focused examples that raise the bar the way you have. This is what you're doing, and we at ISI are grateful. One final thought. I can imagine no higher calling than to be connectors of people and communities. Thank you for answering that calling.
Thank you, Mr. Williams, and thanks for your comments.
Mr. Chairman, next up for public comment, we have a Dan Winters.
Good morning, Mr. Winters.
Greetings, Mr. Chairman. Thank you for having me. My name is Dan Winters, spelled D-A-N-W-I-N-T-E-R-S. I'm the head of Americas with GRESB. We are the global ESG benchmark used by infrastructure investors, particularly pension funds, to engage with their assets on the ground that they have funded. One of our founding members is CalPERS, the largest pension plan in California. And they were instrumental in rolling out the ESG benchmark starting in 2015. The California High-Speed Rail has been participating in the benchmark since inception and has been doing a great job. It was very heartening for me to listen to Mr. Williams talking about this Envision Platinum rating that you've just achieved. This is amazing. This is strong leadership by the state, and it very much applies to how you're seen and perceived within the benchmark. The key with ESG benchmarking is to get organizations outside of their four walls to understand what's happening out there in the broader context. The members that make up the benchmark for high-speed rail include organizations in the UK, and France and Australia and other places around the globe. California has been doing a great job. You score as a 4-star within our system, but there's more work that can be done. And the idea behind benchmarking is to do this annually, to put management teams through the paces, to understand the best practices that are happening in the industry, and to consider them within the context of your risk management and business value practices. You've been doing a great job, and we certainly hope that you continue to participate in the benchmark going forward. And thank you so much for your leadership. It's really, really great to see. That is all.
Thank you, sir.
Mr. Chairman, next up for public comment, we have Roland Lebrun.
Good morning, Mr. Lebrun.
Good morning, Chair Richards, directors. This is a quick ask. So first of all, I really appreciate the closed captioning, which I'm using right now. The reason I'm addressing you is that occasionally I need to capture the transcript, and the only way I can do this right now is via screen capture, which is very convoluted. So if your IT technical staff could find a way to enable the Save Transcript button at the bottom of the closed captioning transcript, that would be much appreciated. Thank you.
Thank you, sir. We'll look into that.
Mr. Chairman, we don't have anybody raising their hand for public comment, but I'm going to briefly go over the instructions just to make sure anybody who joined after the initial instructions can still provide comment. For the attendees who are joining this meeting today via the Zoom application, please use the raise your hand feature typically located at the bottom of your screen so that I may call on you to provide your comment. Mr. Chairman, next up for public comment, we have, and I apologize if I mispronounce the name, Kaja Pergar.
Kaja Pergar, good morning.
Good morning. Yeah, it's actually Kaya, but everyone struggles with that. Nice to meet you, everyone. Great to be here. I'm working with the Task Force on Climate-Related Financial Disclosures, TCFD, as some of you might have heard. And TCFD was set up by G20 and the Financial Stability Board back in 2015 to really come up with a framework to develop disclosures for the financial institutions to invest their capital in the right way, to ensure that we have financial stability as we evolve our systems and ideally prevent additional impacts on climate. And TCFD has really had amazing success. For example, even between last year and this year, we've gone from 1,500 supporters, which are companies that are supporting our cause, to this year of more than 2,500. We also are going to become mandatory in UK, European Union, Switzerland, Hong Kong, Singapore, and I believe even the SEC is considering the TCFD framework as one of the key inputs. I believe it will also be an important input as the California High-Speed Railway continues growing and works with their suppliers. It's a way to really ensure that the suppliers and the partners you have in this space are indeed considering climate risks and opportunities and are doing what it takes to mitigate those climate risks and increase their climate opportunities. So just wanted to raise that as an important framework to consider as part of your due diligence and your decisions when choosing suppliers and partners, as well as your customers. Thank you for having me.
Thank you for being with us.
Mr. Chairman, at this moment, we don't have any attendees who recently joined, and none of the attendees are raising their hand.
Okay, thank you. I know we appreciate the recognition for economic or environmental sustainability, as everyone on the board knows, as well as the public. This authority was conceived on maximizing sustainability of our environment, and we work hard every day to ensure that we keep that focus at 2020. So thank you all. And with that, we will now move into our agenda. Item number 1, as you've noted on today's agenda, is our board election. And I've asked our Chief Counsel, Alicia Fowler, to handle today's election of the board chair and vice chair. Alicia?
Good morning, board members. Thank you, Board Chair Richard. We will do these as two separate votes, first for the chair position and then the vice chair position. So I will start by taking nominations for the position of chairperson for the board. Do I have a nomination?
Director Schenk? Your mute is on.
I don't know, that a mute goes on automatically. Somebody doesn't want to hear from me. But it is my really great pleasure to nominate our current chair, Tom Richards, for another term. Tom has seen us through a very, very difficult time having these meetings via Zoom. He has really given so much of himself at the expense of his personal and business life, I'm sure, to lead us. And so, as I say, it is my honor to nominate Tom Richards for another term as chair.
Do I have a second?
I'll second.
Oh, I was going to also second it with a comment that I would, well, but I don't want to butcher what Lynn just said because she said it best. I want to thank Tom. It's been a great year for me. You've made my time on this board well worth it, and I appreciate all of your leadership. Thank you, and I second the nomination.
Thank you. Do I have any other nominations for the board chairperson position?
Call for a unanimous vote.
Well, I was going to ask Director Schenk if any of the other board members wanted to make any comment on the nomination before we vote.
Well, I echo the same comments that both of my colleagues made.
We all think Tom did and continues to do a terrific job, and we're grateful that he's willing to do it. So,
Board Secretary, can you please call the roll for the election for board chair?
Of course. Director Schenk?
a resounding yes.
Chair Richards?
Jane?
Director Camacho?
Yes.
Vice Chair Miller?
Yes, of course.
Director Perea?
Yes.
Director Guillemette?
Absolutely, yes.
Director Escutia?
Yes.
Director Williams?
Aye.
Director Pena? I believe you're muted, Director.
Yes. Yes.
Mr. Chairman, congratulations, the motion carries.
And condolences.
Yeah.
Now we'll move to nominations for the vice chair position. Do I have any nominations?
Yeah, Alicia, yes, again, it's my great pleasure to nominate for another term our current vice chair, Nancy Miller, who has also done a fantastic job for us and is a great partner to Tom Richards and a wonderful leader for this board. So again, it's my honor to nominate Nancy for a second term with gratitude that she's willing to do it.
Do we have any second?
And I'll similarly second that nomination. Thank you so much, Nancy, for your leadership.
And are there any other nominations for the vice chair position? Okay, and do any board members want to make a comment about this nomination before we proceed to vote? Okay, board secretary, can you call the roll to elect Nancy Miller as vice chair for the board?
Of course. Director Schenk?
Another resounding yes.
Chair Richards?
Yes, thank you.
Director Camacho?
Absolutely, yes.
Vice Chair Miller?
Oh, I don't think I should be voting on myself.
Well, it might be a close vote, Nancy. You never know.
Yeah.
You know, girls never vote for themselves and then they lose.
They
All right,
say every
case
vote
yes.
counts.
Director Perea?
Yes.
Director Guillemette?
Yes.
Director Escutia?
Aye.
Director Williams?
Aye.
Director Pena.
Yes.
Mr. Chairman, the motion carries.
Thank you, Mr. Secretary. And Alicia, thank you very much for handling the election.
Of course.
And thank you, ladies and gentlemen, for your continued confidence. I appreciate it very much, and I know that our vice chair does also. With that, we'll move on to our agenda item number 2, which is the approval of our August 18th, 19th minutes. Are there any comments on the minutes or requests for changes? Seeing no one's hand, we will then ask for a motion to approve the minutes for the August meetings.
So moved.
By Director Williams, a second, please.
Second.
Second.
Director Perea as the second. Please call the roll.
Director Schenk,
Aye.
Chair Richards,
Yes.
Director Camacho,
Yes.
Vice Chair Miller,
Yes.
Director Perea,
Yes.
Director Gilmetti,
Yes.
Director Escutia,
Yes.
Director Williams,
Aye.
Director Pena.
Yes.
Mr. Chairman, the motion carries.
Thank you, Mr. Secretary. Item number 3, members, is the consideration of adopting the fiscal year 2021-22 budget. CFO Annis, good morning.
Good morning, Mr. Chair and board members. I'm, as you said, bringing to the board an action item requesting approval of the 21-22 budget. The board will remember that I previously addressed the budget at the July board meeting. At that time, we had deferred action on the fiscal year budget pending the final month of the legislative year, which occurred in August and September. So in this presentation, I'll update the board on the final legislative action and how we adjusted our budget relative to that legislative action. Talk about the methodology of coming up with a modified budget and how we plan to execute that budget going forward in the fiscal year. I'll note this item does not include any change to the programmatic multi-year baseline budget. We plan to bring that back to the board at a subsequent board meeting, likely in November. If I could go to the first slide. So as the board knows, the legislature did defer action on the governor's budget request for new Proposition 1A funding for capital outlay. A total of $4.2 billion had been requested of our Prop 1A funding. The legislature deferred action on that until January. So we had planned as of July to establish a $3.2 billion 21-22 capital outlay expenditure budget. But you'll see as we go through this presentation, we've adjusted that to remove the assumption that any Prop 1A bond funds are available in this particular fiscal year. The legislature did, however, in September, augment our state operations or administrative budget. They had deferred action on some of the governor's January and May state operation budget proposals in June, but in September, they passed a bill, Senate Bill 170, that did accept the governor's administrative augmentations, and I'll go through those more specifically later. But that's the action the legislature took. And again, we've modified our budget approach to reflect that action. As another kind of starting off point, I wanted to report that our current cash balance, as reported this morning at the Finance and Audit Committee through July, was a little bit shy of $2 billion. That's primarily cap and trade funds that have come in over the past auctions that have not been expended. There's a little bit in there, about $125 million of Prop 1A proceeds that have been appropriated for state administration and also our bookend projects. So Prop 1A does remain available for our state administration cost and for our bookend projects such as the Caltrain electrification project and the LA Union Station project. But in terms of our Central Valley construction and our environmental completion on phase 1, up until such time as we receive a new Prop 1A appropriation, we'll rely exclusively this fiscal year on cap and trade proceeds, both those received to date and in the next auctions throughout this fiscal year. The board policy require board approval of the annual fiscal year budget. And so what we bring to you today is a proposed capital budget of $2,313 million and an administrative budget of $91.1 million. And next slide. So I wanted to go through the methodology we use to craft the capital budget for the fiscal year. The first thing we wanted to do is make sure we had the most updated revenue and expenditure information. So we did incorporate the August cap and trade auction. As I believe all the members know, that was a record-breaking auction. We'll be receiving about $253 million from that auction, which is about $127 million above the typical conservative forecast we do. So we've incorporated that revenue for our planning purposes in crafting this budget. We also updated expenditures both last fiscal year and the first month of this fiscal year, July. And our expenditures in July were about $201 million below the forecast. So we went ahead and incorporated that into our baseline to kick off the budget exercise. The next methodology here was we are the first time formally establishing a prudent cash reserve. We have not done that in the past because with our Prop 1A authority, we had flexibility to add to our cash as needed. The treasurer does biannual bond sales in the spring and fall. So if we were running low on cash, we could work with the Department of Finance and the treasurer to sell additional bonds in the spring or fall sale. And they also have what they call commercial paper authority on a monthly basis to augment our cash. So we haven't formally established a prudent reserve in the past, given our flexibility on cash with bond funds. But since we're now at this point in time relying on cap and trade exclusively for Central Valley construction cost and the environmental work this fiscal year, we think it's prudent to establish a cash reserve. And what we're suggesting as a level is $300 million. And what that means is we would put our budget plan together in a way that assumes at the end of the fiscal year, at June of 2022, we would end with a $300 million cash balance. And most of that, in fact, all of that being on the cap and trade side. I'm going to have a later slide where I talk about the volatility of cap and trade, but that's the primary driver of this level of a prudent reserve is the unknowns with future cap and trade auctions. And we have 3 more auctions this fiscal year, November, February, and May. The next thing we did is we wanted to prioritize current work on current contracts over new work for new contracts. And what we thought would be prudent here in implementing that priority would be to bump any expenditures on these larger new contracts to July of 22, so essentially the next fiscal year. And the largest of these would be the track and systems contract, also contracts that would extend design work on the Merced extension and the Bakersfield extension, as well as some station planning activities on those Central Valley stations. So we're not proposing to stop any procurement activity. We would plan to bring to the board these procurement actions as we're ready to move forward. Of course, the track and system is already out for procurement. So what we'd bring back to the board next on that would be the recommendation to accept one of the bids when those come in. On the design advancement contracts, our next step would be coming to the board requesting approval to go forward with the request for proposals for those contracts. So again, we would still plan to continue work on these procurements, but for budget planning purposes, we've moved any expenditures to July of 22. And in some cases, without the cash constraint, we may be able to implement those a few months earlier, more in the April to June period. We can still revisit that as we go and get to the spring. As I said, we'll move forward with procurement activities, but we think it's prudent for budget planning purposes to make sure we have sufficient resources to advance the existing construction work in the Central Valley and the environmental work. So in the budget we brought you in July, we had included in this fiscal year budget about $300 million for new contract related costs. So again, that expenditure has been pushed to the 22-23 fiscal year for budget planning purposes. Next slide, please. So the next step was we looked at what additional cuts would be necessary to arrive at a prudent cash reserve of $300 million at the end of June 22. And to get to that level, we looked at another $407 million of reductions to make to our budget plan to ensure that we end the fiscal year at that level. Next step is really implementation. What we're telling our project managers here is to continue work at all deliberate speed. We don't want to see any delayed activity. So they will continue to advance as quickly as they can, be it right away, utility relocation, design build contract work, opening new construction sites, all of the work that's happening in the Central Valley, as well as the environmental approvals. However, we will continue to track that monthly, see how we compare to our planned expenditures. And if we see any trends that exceed our budget projections that might result in a cash balance of under $300 million at the end of the fiscal year, we would bring further adjustments back to the board. As I said, conversely, we also on the procurement activity, monitor our cash situation, future cap and trade, future expenditures, and we'll be flexible to bring back to the board any changes to the budget that we think are warranted based on changing conditions. And that would certainly include early action by the legislature should it occur early 22 on appropriating additional Prop 1A bond funds. Next slide, please. So this slide is just showing you where we made the budget adjustments. Again, the first slide, what we label as the July budget.
Brian, let me interject here to give us a chance to have a conversation rather, if you don't mind.
Sure.
So in your report, you say that there's no delay of activity, and I appreciate hearing that. But can you just elaborate for me a little bit that should the legislature not act as we would ask them to and not do this in a timeline, what would be the impact? What kind of delay would we foresee? And how would that delay impact the people in the area? Because, their lives are being disrupted by this enough. And to, delay it even more is not something that I would like to see happen in the near future or any time. So can you elaborate a little bit on that, on the delay aspect of when we would anticipate delay if the legislature doesn't act?
Sure. So I would answer that maybe with a few examples. As I said, on the new contracts, we may be ready to execute a new design contract as early as April, May of next year. If we do have to delay that a couple months, clearly that's likely adds on to our timeline. the ultimate start of that work, but also further down the line, start of construction on extensions to Merced and Bakersfield. As far as the other construction work that's ongoing, and I think what you alluded to in terms of really community impacts, if we don't receive the legislative appropriation next year, we would be in a place, I believe in 22-23, where we would have to slow work on our civil projects. So some new construction sites we would not be prudent to open if we didn't have enough money to continue to pay the invoices. And likely at some point, we would even have to shut down some existing construction sites. And of course, that's where you have community impacts to the extent you have half completed grade separations and things of that nature, where there's some, changes of routes and some detours. And of course, any delay of that type, you are adding to cost. You have delays and you have additional cost incurred because of those delays.
Well, I just think it's unconscionable to extend the misery of the people along the line. We've heard year after year after year, of the impact. And we've got to remember that we're impacting people's lives while we're trying to do good for the future of society. But anyway, if you would, in continuing in your reports, let us know in whatever detail you can what these impacts are on the people along these corridors, these communities. Thank you.
So again, on the far right column here, you can see the change where the reductions have been taken. Again, we in the July budget package, we had set aside about $100 million for Merced and Bakersfield design advancement, additional station design work as well. That's the expenditures that have been pushed to July and beyond of 22. Also note the Central Valley Rail segment, the $199 million, that's been pushed to the next fiscal year. And then the other reductions are a combination, again, of reducing the July, the expenditures, or the budget for the reduced July expenditures, and taking further reductions to arrive at the $300 million prudent reserve at the end of the year. Next slide, please.
Brian, can we go back to that slide? Can you give us some detail behind the reduction of CP1 and CP2 and 3?
Sure. Well, one thing I might point out is we did not here reduce the CP4 budget. And the reason for that is, there's some hope we might be able to finish that in the fiscal year. I know there's a couple of job sites where that may be tight, but we did retain that full budget because we want to have that project be able to proceed without any constraints on cash. As far as the other reductions in 2, 3, and 1, again, and it's primarily reductions taken to arrive at our prudent cash reserve. We did consult a bit with the project managers, but again, the level of the reduction is driven by the reaching the prudent reserve. I will say that in these budgets, we do budget conservatively, and I'd say prudently. We look at what in a sense, the maximum expenditure that may be needed for each, because we want to make sure we have sufficient money and aren't constrained on cash. So we'll monitor, of course, every month at the FNA what the expenditures are against these forecasts. But this $2.3 billion budget, again, we think may be sufficient for our construction packages in the Central Valley to continue without cash being a constraint for this fiscal year. Again, would conclude the fiscal year, we think, with about $300 million cash balance.
I get that, but are we slowing construction contracts down, or did we optimistically overestimate how much money we would be spending during our fiscal year for CP1, 2, and 3?
Well, I would say I wouldn't characterize it that way, but I'd say we do budget conservatively, and we generally look at the maximum that we may need, but typically we spend less than that budgeted level. So we don't budget kind of at a mean, if you will, or an average of what we think will happen. We budget more at the high level, the more aggressive expenditure level, assuming, no issues arise and no everything goes about as well as could be in terms of the pipeline of right-of-way, utility relocations, commercial issues with the contractors, third parties, et cetera.
So do our project managers think we're going to have to slow the contractors down, and I think they can maintain a schedule?
Well, at this point, we're gonna go forward and try to maintain the schedule.
Okay, thank you.
All right. I did want to bring up this cap and trade slide, which some of you may have seen before in prior presentations. And this is really just to explain why we feel a $300 million prudent cash reserve is warranted. And that's because we recognize that the cap and trade market is subject to shocks. We've really seen two major shocks to the auction market in the last 5 years. The first was in 2016, 2017. At that time, the program was set to expire in 2020, and there were several legal challenges to it. AB 398 passed in 2017. It extended the program to 2030 and resolved some of the legal risk. And we did have relative stability of the program for the next 2.5, 3 years until COVID came along, and that's been the second shock that resulted in really a near zero revenue producing auction in May of 2020, and then a slowly recovering auction market for the next couple auctions. But again, those have in the last two, I think we'd say that those appear fully recovered at this point, and even are seeing some of the strongest results yet. But again, because we have potential for shocks, as we've seen in history here, we do think a reserve is a prudent approach. Next slide. This is just another background slide to illustrate that when you look at total funding directed to the high-speed rail program, we do have fully sufficient funding to meet our current obligations and our planned new contract obligations. This is both a combination of funds that have already been received and spent in some cases, and then future funds. The first three boxes on the bottom, Prop 1A that has been appropriated, federal ARA, and cap and trade received to date of $4.2 billion. Those are mostly expended resources, but we do have, again, a current cash balance of about $1.9 billion remaining. What we're looking for next is that Prop 1A future, that additional $4.2 billion that's in the middle of the bar chart here. That will greatly assist us on cash flow as well, because while on the top blue boxes there, that's future cap and trade that expected to come in between $4.6 billion and $6.9 billion. That will come in quarterly through the end of 2030. So the Prop 1A is important to meet our shorter term cash needs. And I'll just mention in the middle there, you see the federal FY10 funds. Of course, those were restored by the Biden administration this year. And we are able to spend those toward the end of our 119-mile construction per agreement with the Federal Railroad Administration. They had advanced the federal ARA funds toward the beginning of expenditures, and in agreement with that, we put the FY10 money toward the end of expenditures for the federal scope. Next slide, please. So this is a summary of our capital outlay budget by fund type. As I'd mentioned before, this budget would exclusively fund project development and Central Valley construction with cap and trade funds. When we get to the bookends, we would be utilizing our available Prop 1A for the bookend funds, the $79 million. And then we have a small amount of cap and trade for other bookends of $4 million. And so that's, and again, the total for the fiscal year budget, $2.3 billion. Next slide. Our administrative budget, as I mentioned, $91.1 million. The legislature did in the Senate Bill 170 approve the governor's proposal to continue what we've called our form to function, where we look at the work of both state staff and contractors and make sure that we've placed the right resource at the right job. And so in this case, we're continuing that. We're eliminating 25 consultants that are assisting us with information technology work and replacing them with 17 new state staff. And that's will result in a net savings of about $4.2 million a year because of the less expensive state staff resources. Additionally, we're adding 56 positions to the authority that will assist us as we advance the program, helping with the Merced and Bakersfield extensions and some of the pre-construction work, such as mapping right away and managing the contract work on the design side. Next slide, please. So this is the conclusion. Again, this is an action item, and we're requesting board approval of a capital budget of $2.3 billion and an administrative budget of $91.1 million. Again, I think this will continue to be somewhat dynamic as we get into next calendar year and continue the discussion with the legislature on the an additional appropriation of Prop 1A. So we'll certainly continue to update the F&A monthly, and if there's any changes that are significant that might result in a budget adjustment to the board approved budget, if you approve this budget today, we'll certainly bring that back to the board in the spring.
Mr. Chair, if I could just ask a quick question. Brian, you may have said this, and I apologize if I missed it, but remind us again what the timing is for the legislature to potentially come back next year with that authorization. When do we expect that might happen? Do you expect it before the budget or as part of next year's budget deliberations?
Yeah, we're hoping earlier than the normal budget process. The governor's office and the legislature, when no deal was reached, what they've characterized this as being deferred until January. So we're hoping when we get to January, February, we will see some action on this. And it's not unusual to have current year budget amendment that's done in the spring. They call these budget bill juniors in the building, so they can in fact adjust appropriations for the 21-22 fiscal year, even as we get to the second half of the fiscal year. So that would be I believe the stated plan at this point, that it would come early in 22.
Anthony, were you done?
I was, and I think Margaret also had her hand up.
Oh, sorry. Go ahead.
Brian, just a point of clarification. The legislature was in negotiations with the governor, and an agreement was not reached, correct? And that's why action was not taken in the legislature?
That's my understanding, correct?
So if there is, assuming that both parties or all three parties work on a solution or compromise, what we may see in January or February, correct?
Yes, I believe you're correct. Yeah, if we saw action go forward in early in 22, I believe that would reflect a negotiated agreement between the administration and the legislature.
Correct. Okay.
And it's certainly the intention of the authority to obviously continue working with the governor's office, as well as to work with the legislature to find resolution as we move into the beginning of the year and find a clear direction of the path forward for us. Any other questions for Director Perea?
Yeah, Brian, thank you for the presentation. I have maybe 2-3 questions, and it's around the page 3 discussion about the expenditures for the future track and rail system, but tied to the questions that have just been asked. The deference of this budget to January, is it because, your understanding, is it because there isn't enough money in Sacramento? So it's an issue of money and supply of it, or are they negotiating in terms of either expanding the pie so that more projects are completed in LA and the Bay Area? Or is it still discussions about whether it's a good idea to move money from the high-speed rail project to other parts of the state? I'm just trying to get a feel for the nature of the delay and how we see the future discussions going between now and January. But also tied to that, now coming into the track and rails and our business plan. Now, understand our business plan was delayed. Is this decision going to further delay our business plan? And the last question I'll ask attached to that is our current business plan has a dual track system as what we're doing. And I understand we're out to bid right now, and we're looking at both options. I just don't want to be in a position to where you come back to us and you only have one option, and it's not the option that's in our business plan. So I'm just trying to get a feel for how all of that ties together.
So Mr. Kelly jumped in. Do you want me to answer, Brian?
Well, yeah, I wanted to try some of this, Brian, and then let's have you talk about some of the other part. I just, Henry, in answering part of your earlier, I think the first part of your 3-part question there, I think is that, look, I think there's 2 things going on. One, remember that it's important for all of us to remember that the proposal that was before the legislature was larger than just this project. There's a broad transportation package that the governor put on the table during the May revise. And so part of the dialogue going back and forth is, what should that look like? Not just the stuff for this project, but the other elements of that transportation package. And you know, how much goes where does it go? What does it go for? In some respects, I think there's some want to wait and see exactly how the federal government resolves the federal funding picture, which I think we'll know more about as we get into October. And then they see that. And then I think the intent is to come back and act early in the year. I've heard both the Assembly Committee chairperson say that her intent is to get this deal done in January. And certainly that would be in our interest so that we can resolve a lot of uncertainty here. But I think part of it is, what does that bigger package go to? Is that the right level? And how do we put that together with better certainty about what the federal government's doing? So that's one part. I do think the second part that's a little bit stickier that we still have to work through is candidly the vision for this project. I do think that the administration has spoken clearly and the board has adopted a business plan that clearly lays out how we would go forward with what we have, how we would intend to start electrified high-speed rail operating in California, and how we would intend to expand that beyond the Central Valley. And I think that's part of the conversation that is still a little unresolved in terms of, I think there's some different visions of that, some different views of that. And I think those have to be worked through still. So I'm hopeful that we'll see the federal government issue resolve a little bit. We'll know how much money is available for what. We can then talk about how we might apply some of that, not just to this project, but to the broader transportation investment scheme in California. And then work closely to resolve the issue and move forward. So the hope is that we'll be able to work early and get some resolution of this in the early part of the new year.
Okay.
Is that pretty much everything, Henry?
Yeah, thank you.
All right, thank you. Director or Vice Chair Miller?
Yes, thank you. I apologize so much. I'm out of the country and I can't see when other people are raising their hands and I don't have video. So I apologize for stepping on some toes there a little bit earlier. But I do appreciate the staff's quick response to what happened at the end of the legislative session. We obviously need to revise our budget and hope that, and I have a great deal of confidence in our staff on what may happen in January. So I would like to move the item.
I'm sorry, I missed you'd like to do what, Nancy?
I apologize. I'd like to move the item. Can you hear me all right?
Sure. We do have a motion. This is a resolution that as a motion made by Vice Chair Miller is to resolve that the board approves the FY 21-22 capital budget of 2.313 billion and the FY 2021-22 administrative budget of 91.1 million, parentheses, subject to adjustments by the enacted state budget, parentheses, close parentheses, comma, that aligns spending for the next year with expected program revenues and spending priorities. So we have a motion. Is there a second?
I'll second, Lynn.
Okay, thank you by Director Schenk. Any further discussion? All in favor? Excuse me, let's don't do that. Let's just call the roll, please.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Director Schenk,
Yes.
Chair Richards,
Yes.
Director Camacho,
Yes.
Vice Chair Miller,
Yes.
Director Perea,
Yes.
Director Guillemette,
Yes.
Director Scutia,
Yes.
Director Williams,
Aye.
Director Pena.
Yes.
Mr. Chairman, the motion carries.
Thank you, Mr. Secretary, and thank you, members. Item number 4 today is the presentation of the revised change order process and suggested modifications to the delegation of authority. CEO Kelly, the floor is yours.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman and members. This is an item that we've been looking at and discussing for some time. I've spoken with each of the board members at some level about this over the course of the last several weeks. We also had a broader review of change order process and some recommendations for really improving and making certain that the documentation on our change orders are sound. So what I'm bringing before the board today is recommended changes to that process to achieve some of those objectives we had both in board recommendations to me and then what I heard from board members as to what was important moving forward to really increase transparency and reporting for the change order process. So I have a PowerPoint here that I would propose to go through that lays out both where we are, where the current change order process is, and then what we're proposing to make different here. At the conclusion of that, I'm happy to answer any questions. Before I jump into the specific PowerPoint presentation here, I will say that I think it's important to remind the board that all of the delegation of authority to me, and then the ability of my ability to then delegate that further down is intended to ensure that we can move through the process as efficiently as possible while we are operating within the adopted budget by the board and working off of something that Brian Annis said earlier. And just to remind the board members, I think in May or June of 2019, we adopted what we called the Rev 1 budget. And that's the budget that we operate in now for the entire enterprise-wide operations that we have. So everything delegated to me under that must be within that budget. And if we are proposing to adjust any contract or any change order that would get outside of that adopted budget, we have to come back to the board for approval of that change order. And so that is the sort of flow and the initial point that we operate off of. Again, the delegations all flow out of the adopted budget by the board. I just add that we have proposed, and we are looking at bringing a Rev 2 budget to this board as early as November. And we have to evaluate what to assume about where we are with the legislature as part of the conversation we just had. But it also would assume to cover some of the things that we identified in the 2020 business plan as things that we need to cover going forward as in terms of costs and risks that we need to account for. So we know we have to bring a Rev 2 budget forward. Our business plan covered that in terms of what would come under that. And again, the delegations of authority would all operate through Rev 2 once the Rev 2 budget is adopted by the board. And so it starts with the budget, and then delegations of authority work from there. Okay. And so with that said, let me just kind of roll through this PowerPoint. Again, I'm happy to answer questions either at the end or along the way. Next slide, please. Justin, can we move the next slide? Or there we go. Thank you. So this is just a quick review of the current change order process and then what we're proposing to change here. I've delegated authority now to execute new contracts or up to $25 million, provided that the action is again consistent with the program baseline and program budget. There is a requirement for a board approval of all new contracts above that level. I may amend any contract, and this is any contract for time only or a time extension, provided that the action is considered with consistent with the program baseline and program budget. Those baselines and budgets include schedules, and sometimes we amend contracts to align to a new schedule, and that authority allows me to do that, but that schedule has to be consistent with what's in the baseline and program budget. I'm also authorized to amend any contract by any dollar amount, provided again that the action is consistent with the program baseline and the program budget. I am to report the contingency balance trends to the Finance and Audit Committee at regular meetings and upon request, and to the board chairperson any single contingency use of 25 million or more, which means if I'm amending a contract or a change order of 25 million or more, that has to be reported to the board chairperson under our current process. Now, typically, I also try to incorporate those into my CEO report to the board, but our current standard is it gets reported to the board chairperson. I'm also authorized to further delegate throughout the organization levels of change order approval, which I do so to ensure we can move change orders efficiently. And there's an internal review process that is part of that as we go forward. All change orders, we report monthly to the Finance and Audit Committee. All of the ones that we adopt and change orders of 25 million or more are reported to the board chair today. The other thing that's important to note is that this is something that was instituted under the Newsom administration, but all change orders we execute are available on our website and are made public. All executed change orders are available publicly and on our website. So there are some things that we propose to change to improve quality control of change orders. And I want to talk about what those are. One is to establish and incorporate a change control committee for change orders valued at $1 million or more. And I'll talk a little bit more about that on the next slide. We want to expand the role of the Business Oversight Committee. This is a governance committee that was established well before I got here to the authority, but it is a committee that's primarily designed with making sure that any mid-year or current progress changes or things we might do that cost money are contained and managed within the adopted program baseline budget. So we have an oversight committee that makes sure that anything we do in the area of commercial that costs really any dollars against the program baseline budget, that they have a review of that to make sure that we are staying within that. Under the current delegation of authority, all change orders at 20 million, the BOC sees, and we are proposing here to reduce that from 20 down to 15, and they'll be informed of any change order at 10. So we'll expand the role of the Business Oversight Committee here. And then any change order above that, I have to, at 25 million or more, of course, I have to approve. And the other reporting change here is rather than just report 25 million or more change orders just to the F&A committee and to the board chairperson, we would report those to the entire board. And that is the reporting change that we are putting into place here. So I want to talk a little bit more about the change committee concept and the reporting requirement on the following slides. Next slide. So the idea of putting in place this change control committee to address some of the issues that the board heard and we talked about on the current change order process, that there's some concern that the documentation could be clearer or more thorough as it relates to the change orders that approve, that there's a lack of clarity or standardization for roles and responsibility in determining merit that might result in delays, that there's a lack of coordination with cost controls on funding sources for the change orders. And so what we are proposing to deal with that is to utilize a concept that has been in use at Caltrans on some of the issues and the work that they have. And what we want to bring into place here is creating the change control committee to make an early determination with more eyes on it, on merit for change orders, and to ensure that we have change order quality control earlier in the change order process, with our legal and commercial teams looking at the wording and the documentation and assuring that we have sound documentation around the change orders. Again, we'll further develop training and reference materials to promote the quality documentation so everybody participating in this process is clear on what we're doing going forward, that all authority parties will confer on what we call the findings of fact, which are part of the change order documentation, and they lay out the merit for the change order in terms of what has gone on, why the change order is here, what the merit is for that change order, and why we make those determinations. And so that'll be clarified before we get into negotiations with the design build contractor. In other words, the PCM, the RDP, and all of our state staff will work to be on the same page before negotiations begin with the design build contractor. And then, of course, the committee will communicate to cost controls earlier and more frequently in the change order process for just improved coordination between the change order and its impact on our budget management as we go forward. So the change order, the change control committee is designed primarily to make sure the documentation is thorough, sound, clear, and that we're communicating between different divisions within the organization on change order process. Next slide, please. This is sort of a flow chart of how the change order process and committee would work. The sort of blue boxes that are not outlined in the darker blue are what had been our current process. And what you see in that third box from the left is after the construction management team is reviewing and recommending a proposed change order, we would then insert the control committee at that point, which involves our commercial team, our legal team, our lead on infrastructure delivery in the Valley, and our project controls team to look at it and help determine and evaluate merit for the change orders. And then it would then proceed forward for our PCM to prepare the findings of fact on the change order. We'd have an authority review of that one more time, make sure everybody's on the same page. Then we get into negotiations with the design build team on that. As you come out of that negotiation, again, you were updating the findings of fact. We would be assuring that something called the record of negotiation, which just reflects all of the levels that have looked at the document and decisions that may have been made at one level and whether they've changed or they're concurred on as we go through, that consensus is reflected in the documentation. We review that for a final time through parts of the change order committee. If those are approved, it moves forward. If there's changes to make, it goes back for rewriting and redrafting. And then ultimately, it goes through our final approval process to be approved going forward. So again, the idea here is to get earlier eyes from commercial and legal on some of these, make sure the documentation on finding of facts and the record of negotiation are clear and established earlier in the process. And so that we've clarified how this will work as we roll through change orders to be considered and approved. Next slide. I've sort of already mentioned this, but again, the idea, the purpose here is to respond to some of the recommendations I've received from the board on addressing the issue of documentation clarity and thoroughness with respect to the change orders. So Putting the control committee in place will validate merit, help set the finding of fact. The record of negotiation will be clearer, and that the documentation standards will be known throughout the organization and clear, and an ability to review that before the final change order is executed. The membership will involve our legal and commercial team, our project controls team, really the members in the field for who do the work on the change orders, from the Director of Infrastructure Delivery to our senior contract managers, and then making sure that we're all evaluating this with sort of a same set of eyes, and then moving forward on these appropriately. The delegations of authority that we currently have in place pretty much remain the same. The new thing here is the introduction of the Change Control Committee for all change orders valued at $1 million or more. And then again, the Change Control Committee will document deliberations and decisions in each review step, and that's part of what we call the record of negotiation. Again, if there's any disagreement or issue with the CCC recommendation, there'll be a memo or at least a documentation of that within the process. But our objective is to gain consensus on moving through the change order process. Next slide. This is sort of just a timetable for how we would follow through with the execution. Beginning tomorrow, we'll update the delegations that will include the Change Control Committee. Assuming that this is approved by the board, we'll finalize that charter, develop what we call a RACI, which is the lining out the roles and responsibilities for each party. That committee will get them into weekly meetings to start reviewing things that are pending. Develop additional documentation requirements as we get through into October. And then we want to have an effort here where we're monitoring how this is working, the CO change order volume, our efficiency and compliance, and get a better sense and a feel for how this is working, making sure we can meet that balance of thoroughness and strong documentation and transparency. At the same time, we're moving efficiently on the work in the field. So that's part of what we'll be evaluating as we go forward. And we are looking to perhaps bring in one more person, the infrastructure delivery principal, who will be somebody who would come in and sort of be in charge of all of this until we have that. Each of our senior contract managers for each of the CPs will fill that role. So this is part of how we would evaluate this and move this going forward, develop training materials, and again, make sure that the thoroughness of the documentation, the clarity of the documentation is in place. So that's the process to improve sort of the issue of the documentation in the files. Again, we will continue to report all change orders to the Finance and Audit Committee, and we'll continue to make all change orders available on our website as we execute those. Next slide. That concludes the presentation here. The other thing that I would recommend or would just comment on, in addition, and what's really before the board, in addition to this specific change in process, is a material change to the resolution of the delegation of authority that's been granted to me to date, and that is to be clearer that for any contract amendment and any change order valued at 25 million or more, that activity is not just reported to the board chairman, but that would be, either of those would be reported to the board as a whole, and we would put that in place effective immediately. And so that is the sum and substance of the primary recommendations we're making at this time. And again, the effort here is to be responsive to some of the recommendations I've received and some of the communication that I've had with board members on this issue. And so with that, I'm happy to answer any questions.
Thank you, CEO Kelly. Director Scusia.
Thank you so much, Brian. Can I go back to your presentation,
Sure.
the slide?
Yes.
And my questions that I'm asking are just for clarification. And I'm
Sure.
asking you to go to page 2, where it says that currently you have the authority to approve and execute new contracts. But then it says in the 1, 2, 3, in the 4th bullet, you also have the ability to amend any contract by any dollar amount.
Right. So
Is that inconsistent?
no, and I'm going to tell you why, or how we read that and how we apply that. an amendment to a contract is an existing contract we have and does include the construction contracts we have. And every change order we do is not a new contract, but every change order we do is an amendment to the existing constructing contract. So all change orders really fall into the authority to amend a contract. Now, what comes into play here that's important to note is the adopted budget that the board has approved for us. And so while it says I can amend any contract or approve a change order of any amount, there are two important caveats to that. The first is it must be within the adopted budget that the board adopted, our program baseline budget. If it would exceed that, the board must approve it. Secondly, if it is in excess of $25 million under our current process, I have to report that to the board chair. And what we're proposing here is I would be reporting that not just to the board chair, but more broadly to the entirety of the board. And that would apply not only to a change order on construction, but any amendment to any contract.
All right, thank you for the clarification. Also on page 2 towards the bottom,
yes,
in which you talk about establishing and incorporating a change control committee.
Yes.
That change control committee is going to report to whom?
Well, the change control committee is going to be formed ultimately to provide what I would call multidisciplinary look at the change orders. And so change orders under the delegation of authority right now are primarily working through, depending on the cost of them, the field level, the infrastructure director level, and then ultimately the executive level, depending on how much they cost. And what we're promoting here is an earlier look on all change orders of $1 million or more from not just the field level folks who are primarily charged with advancing the work, candidly, but also making sure that our legal team and our commercial team are looking at it for contract consistency and valuation. And so there's a determination being made with that set of eyes. And now our project risk committee, which is project controls and risk committee, which will also take a look at this and help with that merit determination on this.
I mean, I think it's excellent to have a multidisciplinary approach to this and to have a set of eyes early on in the process. Absolutely great idea. But my concern is that I still don't know who the control committee reports to. And then when I look at page 5 of your slide deck, and I look at the members of the change control committee, I don't see, where are you in this? Are you a member of the change committee?
I'm not on the change control committee.
Wouldn't you want to be on the change control committee?
No. And the reason I don't want to be on the change control committee is that I delegate authority for the approval of some of these things up to certain levels. But when a change order reaches a certain level, it does require my approval. But I have to have some faith at some point in our legal team and our commercial team to work with the people in the field to evaluate the reasonableness of these, the merit of these, and move forward on these. And what this is designed to do is make sure we have a multidisciplinary look at that, and that we are documenting through findings of fact and the record of negotiation why we think it's meritorious and why we think it's reasonable. But if I have to approve every change order of $1 million, that's all I'll do. I won't do anything else here.
I'm not too sure. No, I'm not. I don't think you let the experts approve,
Yes.
But I think you're also a very valuable set of eyes that should be in the process early on in terms of change orders.
Well, I would say this, if it's I certainly am aware of many of these, and I would also say to you that the way our delegation of authority works, as change orders reach a higher and higher value, they come up the executive chain for approval. And so, for example, as I said earlier, the change order that's valued at 15 million or more will now need to be approved by the Business Oversight Committee. And the Business Oversight Committee is our lawyer, our top lawyer. It's Brian Annis, the Chief Financial Officer. It goes through a level of executive approval. Once it reaches a threshold of 25 million, it does have to come to me. It comes to me through the executive committee, and then I make determinations after I'm informed of all the lower level determinations, whether I also think those are meritorious or if there's things that I need clarification on. And so there has been occasion where a change order has come to me and I've sent it back for more review or more clarification.
All right.
But I have, just to be.
I'm gonna trust you, Brian. I'm
Okay.
gonna trust you, which is very hard for me to do, to trust anyone, especially when we're dealing with billions of dollars. But
Yes.
I'm going to trust you.
Well-
I'm going to trust that we have learned from, issues in the past and we're moving forward. And I love this multidisciplinary approach to things. I love a set of eyes early on in the process. So I'm going to trust you. Let me go now back to page 4, which is the actual flow chart.
Yeah.
And just a quick question. In this flow chart, I see the activities of the change order committee, but at which point does the business oversight committee get involved in this flow chart?
This flow chart is really to show how you're getting into the sort of the second level of this, and I will talk about that. But this flow chart shows how a typical change order goes through the review process and is approved. But what it doesn't lay over here is, I don't think it specifically does, the dollar value of the change order. And so what happens is this is for any change order that's at $1 million or more. This will be the process for approval. But what happens under our overall process is we have delegated levels of authority for approval as it goes. So even though this is going to be for all change orders at $1 million, for a change order valued up to $5 million, that goes through a senior contract manager for approval who's at the state employee at the field level. When it rises up to between 5 or 10 million, it has to go through our regional director of infrastructure delivery. So this process occurs, but they ultimately sign off at those levels. As it gets up to today, it's 20 million, but we're going to lower it to 15. As it gets to 15, it'll have to go to the BOC for the Business Oversight Committee to review it and approve it. And then any change order at 25 million or more has to come to me, and it comes to me through our executive committee, which is different than the BOC. The executive committee is a committee of senior executives here that approve both policy changes affecting the authority and clearly change orders of this magnitude. So 25 million or more comes up to me. So the BOC comes into play at change orders going forward at 15 million or above. And then,
so then after this comes to you, assuming it's something greater than 25 million, after it comes to you, then you go and report this to the board of directors.
That is correct. That is correct.
All right. My last question is taking you to the actual board policy document.
Yes.
Which I think was written by counsel, and it starts with board policy HSRA 11-001. My question is on page 2 of the document, item number 4, where it says a list of all new or amended authority contracts with a value of 10,000 or more will be periodically presented to the board by authority staff. So my question that I have to you, and please excuse my ignorance, but I just want to make sure that we are precise in the terms that we are using. So authority contracts, does that include change orders?
Yeah, I'm sorry. Can you just direct me to on that memo again where you're?
Yes, I don't know if you can see it, Brian. It's the memo. It's
I have the memo. I just want to know which page.
Page 2 at the top, item number 4.
Oh, a list of all new or amended authority contracts. Yes.
Contracts includes change orders.
Yes, and
now it says with a value of 10,000 or more. Yeah. So does that mean that from 10,000 to up to 24.9 million? Remember, I used 24.9 million, not 25 million, but 24.9 million. It says it will be periodically, and there's a question as to what periodically is, presented to the board. And the word presented is actually, I don't know what you're going to be presenting.
Well, I guess I want to answer it this way. I tell you how I think we meet that every month. Every month, these things are listed and approved, not approved, but are listed and presented to the Finance and Audit Committee. Okay. The list of all of our contracts are there, and every new change order we enter into is reported to the Fiscal and Audit Committee each month. All
right. So just to be clear then, it includes, the word contracts include change orders.
In this context, I'll just say that in this context, I believe it does. And I say that because we do report all change orders to the Finance and Audit Committee each month, no matter what level they are.
No matter what level they are. All right. Great. Thank you so much for your answers. Thank you, Brian.
You're welcome. Thank you.
Thank you, Martha. And yet, yes, Director Pena.
Question for you, Brian.
Yes.
Going back to the chart on page 4.
Yes.
If there's two different places where approval is required. What happens? What's the process if there isn't approval?
I'm sorry. Can you point to where on the flow chart you're referencing? I think where you have the checks on the subsequent boxes. I don't know if you. I think you can see that, but there's this review at each step of the way, and then it sort of says approved or not approved, no or yes.
Right.
That's a review of something. If it's no, it has to go back for further work. If it's yes, it advances through the flow chart. And so, and ultimately, if a change order is, if it went all the way through the process and the change order is denied, but I will tell you, you usually don't have to go all the way through the process to deny a change order. We would make that call earlier on a merit determination. We'd either say there's merit or no merit. And so if there's no merit, sometimes the contractor, has to, they can either then appeal this to an independent, we have dispute resolution boards and ultimately arbitration. And so if we were to reject something out of hand and say, that's just not one that we're going to execute, there's an ability of the contractor to say, well, this issue should go to a dispute resolution board, which makes non-binding decisions, and then ultimately to arbitration if it had to. And so that's what happens if we have a complete denial of a change order.
Okay. And another question I have is, does the Department of Transportation have a similar process?
They do. They have a manual which they've shared with me and us, and we've looked at that. And I've brought over some employees from the department who are now helping us in the field in the Central Valley, and the Change Control Committee is something that we're incorporating from some of their process. That I think it was here at one time at the authority some time ago, but I wanted to bring it back, and so we're bringing it back here. I will say this. There is one key difference between how Caltrans does this and us, and I think it's an important distinction for you to at least know about. The average value of a Caltrans project. Caltrans does, thousands of projects around the state. The average value of a Caltrans project, I'm going off of memory now, but when I was the secretary, I recall it being on the order of 90 or 95% of the projects are valued below $10 million. And so their thresholds for approval on things are much lower. We're dealing here with a project that is billions of dollars. And so our threshold changes are a little bit different for who can approve what level, but the concept of the Change Control Committee and having various levels of approval are consistent with what Caltrans approach does.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you, Director Pena. And yes, Lynn, have you got something, please?
Yes. Yes, thank you. Well, more of a comment than a question for Brian, though. And I said this in the pre-meeting briefing. Now, when we went through the Special Matters Committee and learned a lot, maybe more than we wanted to learn, right, Martha? Yeah, so I'm very happy to see the reincorporation at a significant level of legal and commercial, because I, for one, have a lot of faith in our lawyers, headed by Alicia, and they were cut out, and so now they're back in, and we want to keep them back in. But I just want to mainly say about this, and Brian, thank you and your team for hearing us, for taking the recommendations of both the Special Matters Committee and as well as other board members individually that you sought out. I know it's not easy being on your side of the table, hearing where the flaws are, but you heard it and you've addressed it. And while certainly all of us appreciate our appointing authorities for appointing us, ultimately, our responsibility is to the public, to the citizenry, to our fellow Californians. And this is about transparency to them. So the reporting to the board, we stand in the shoes of our fellow citizens. So this reporting is to the public. And I know that my fellow board members keep that in mind. We always have to keep that in the forefront, that this is not our money, and we're in the public trust. And so all of this reporting is to them and is important. And on the one hand, but on the other hand, of course, you and your team day to day have to deal with so much that some of us can't even imagine it. So we have to be mindful of the decisions to percolate to what level. And I too remember when I was secretary at Caltrans, there were probably 1,000 decisions a day, monetary decisions, and you have to incorporate some common sense as to what goes to whom at different levels. So I just want to say that I, for one, appreciate that our sometimes very candid, very pointed, sometimes very negative comments about what was going on have been taken to heart. And I believe this is a good approach, but I also know that if we find in the implementation that there will be opportunity for more improvement, I know that you will listen and make sure that we have those improvements too, so that ultimately the public can redevelop a sense of trust in us. So thank you for that.
I appreciate those comments. Thank you.
Thank you, Director Schenck. Any other questions or comments from any of my colleagues? Hearing none, then members, this is also a resolution HSRA 2109 in which we are resolving that the board amends the delegation of authority to the CEO, board policy HSR A11-001, last amended May 20, 2021, by revising the delegation of authority to the CEO related to contracts and contract management by one, requiring $25 million or greater single contingency use reporting to the board rather than to the board chairperson only, and two, clarifying that that single contingency use reporting is required for amended contracts and construction change orders as stated and contained in the staff proposed revision to such board policy presented at the board meeting on September 23, 2021. Do we have a motion for approval?
So moved.
By Director Schenck, and a second?
Second.
Second by Director Williams. Secretary, please call the roll.
Director Schenck,
Yes.
Chair Richards,
Yes.
Director Camacho,
Yes.
Vice Chair Miller,
I believe that she may have had to leave us.
Okay, thank you, Mr. Chairman. Director Perea,
Yes.
Director Guillemette,
Aye.
Director Scutia,
Yes.
Director Williams,
Aye.
Director Pena.
Yes.
Mr. Chairman, the motion carries.
Thank you, Mr. Secretary, and thank you, colleagues. Moving on to agenda item number 5, which is our last action item today. It's to consider approving the fiscal year 2021 internal audit plan and acknowledging the internal quality assurance self-assessment for fiscal year 2021. We have our internal audit manager, Paula Rivera. Thank you for joining us, Ms. Rivera. The floor is yours.
Good afternoon, Chair Richards and board members. I'm Paula Rivera, and I bring to you today a look back and a look forward for the audit office. The look back is part of our quality assurance program. There are 3 portions to our quality assurance. We have an ongoing monitoring on a per audit basis. that's done internally. Internally, we have an annual quality assurance review, which is what I bring to you today. And then every 3 years, we have an external quality assurance. Our last was in February of 2020. So I bring to you today that look back. We had 2 auditors in our office who didn't work on the assignments. They reviewed the assignments and they determined that the work that we're doing meets our audit standards. The look forward that I bring to you is the audit plan for the current fiscal year. We have 3 assignments that are in progress. We have one that's not listed on the audit plan that's in the draft and final reporting stages. And then we have a number of new audits that we're going to perform this year. The audit plan was developed based on input from board members, authority executives and managers, and also audit office experience. We took all that input and the audit managers and I did a risk assessment. We identified the audits that had the highest impact to the authority. And then those are what made the audit plan this year. I'm happy to answer any questions or go over any of them in detail if you would like.
Paula, it's Lynn.
Yes, Director Escutia. Oh, I'm sorry.
Oh,
Go ahead.
yeah, and I just have a quick one. Paula, we talked yesterday about the outside eyes, the consultant that looks at your internal audit plan every few years. Would you just expand on that for the other board members and especially our new board member so that we're all on the same page about who looks at you and your plan from the outside?
Okay, happy to. The internal audit standards require an external peer review, and we have one every 3 years. And that is a group of audit managers and audit executives from other state departments. They come into our office, they look at our policies and procedures, our audit manuals, our audit plans, whether or not we've complied with standards. And then they look at our specific audits and they look to see if those audits comply with standards and comply with our audit manual. So it's an external look every 3 years.
And the last one was done when?
February of 2020.
Okay.
So our first external peer review was in February of 2017. And they recommended some changes to our audit charter, which we brought to the board. The charter is approved by the board. And this last peer review had no recommendations. So we brought the clean report to the board back in June, I believe. It happened to be right as soon as we got sent home for the pandemic. So it came to the board a little later than usual.
Thank you.
Yes, I think Director Escutia.
Yeah, thank you. Thank you so much, Lynn, for asking that question, because that was the first thing in my mind about external auditors.
I read your mind.
No, the problem is that I sit on the audit committee for another nonprofit. So the use of external auditors and obviously the independence and the integrity of the process is critical. So I have to tell you, Ms. Rivera, to have an external audit every 3 years, do you think that that's too much time? Is there maybe some merit to having an external audit done maybe once a year or once every 2 years?
So there are 2 sets of audit standards that we follow. One is generally accepted governmental auditing standards, and they require the peer review every 3 years.
Okay.
The internal auditing standards require a peer review every 5 years. And since we do both kinds of audits, we follow the more stringent requirements. We could certainly look into it.
I mean, as long as you're following the guidelines that are imposed upon you, that I was not aware of those guidelines, so that's fine. I understand that. I'd like to call your attention to this document that's called the Audit Plan Fiscal Year 2021-22. And you have basically, policy areas: incurred cost contract, data validation, grant management, And the thing that caught my attention was item number 4, contract management, which is basically rights of way and project construction management contracts. Now, you have budgeted 1,500 hours for this, and you estimate the completion will be next year, winter of 2022. This issue of construction management costs, as you well have seen in the discussion of change orders, as well as rights of way, it's a big area, that seeps into constantly, our discussions here in high-speed rail. But as you're doing this audit, even though you estimate completion in winter of next year, is there a way, well, first of all, would it be proper for you to reveal some preliminary findings, maybe halfway through next year, rather than wait until the end of the year to find out about this stuff?
I hesitate because anything that we would find preliminarily, the audit standards require that the auditee have an opportunity to provide a response so that our findings are balanced with what in this case, what the program, the infrastructure delivery branch can provide that context. So I hesitate to provide preliminary findings that would only be one-sided, just from the auditor's understanding.
Okay, that's fair. I understand that. That's fair. I would hope that as we are developing this new process with the change control committee that Brian is developing, that we'll be able to capture some of the problems early on. So, okay, I'm trying to trust the process, which is not really like me. The last question that I have is, this audit plan that you have is very ambitious, and I really congratulate you on that one, especially item number 8 on diversity, equity, and inclusion. So I'm glad you're going to be auditing for that. Have you considered auditing for ESG, for environmental, societal, and governance standards that we are adopting?
We've considered it. It's something that's emerging as an audit topic, and there's an awful lot of literature in the internal audit world about it. We're waiting a little bit of time for it to become more prevalent to have more experience, so that we have more to rely on, because it's something new for our auditors. It's an audit that we've never done. So we would like to wait a year or so to be able to gain some more experience and find some additional literature in the internal audit world.
All right, Brian, I ask you the same question.
Yeah.
ESG is very important. I think there was a gentleman in the public comment that congratulated you for having done this years ago.
Well, you're going to hear, you are going to hear in a presentation during the CEO report from Meg Cederoth, who is our, as you know, our planning sustainability director. Calling it ESG is sort of the new acronym, if you will, but the practices have been in place here for a while. And so we have these practices that now, we would look at and say, here's how we would describe our ESG score and the practices that we do in each of the E, the S, and the G. And I think that part of the informational presentation during the CEO report is to talk a little bit about it with you guys, about how we translate that into what we might do in a procurement process to say, we want to score on this. How do we score on this? And so the only comment I wanted to make about this interaction on the diversity, equity, and inclusion steps. Look, this is an area where I'm extremely proud of what we are trying to do. I'm doing trainings that I don't know how many other agencies are doing to our staff on some issues that are key here. We've developed a task force, a staff-driven task force with an outside facilitator to look at our practices in promoting, hiring, and contract work, and seeing what we can do better and getting a set of recommendations back on that. And, we are really getting our arms around the ESG process and how to do more on that in the procurement world. And so I think this audit, given the timing of it, we'll be able to report to you guys exactly all of the things that we are doing throughout the enterprise to make sure that we are leading the way in the ESG world. And I think we've made advancements on that. We have more to do. It's one of the high priorities of this board, and it's one of the high priorities for me as the manager here. Is that I want to make sure that we are doing all the things we can to make sure that this authority and the work we do is representative of the state, and that we are serving the communities we serve by making sure we can communicate and work with those communities. And so it's really important to me. And I think what this audit will show, the early audit, I think will show what we are doing in this area. And I think a later audit would show how it's going, because some of it is developing, like scoring in procurement for ESG. That's something that we're going to just start to institute.
And also scoring for governance,
Yes.
how we govern ourselves as an authority, and hopefully the more transparent we are, the better, the higher scoring we will get.
Exactly. I agree.
All right. Well, I guess I'll just cool my jets. I'll just wait.
Well, you will have the benefit of an audit, a review of what we're doing, and we will be coming back to you with RFPs and RFQs that are coming up, where you guys are going to be able to ask us, what are you doing on ESG here? And we're going to have to answer that.
All right. Thank you, Brian.
Thank you, Director Skusha. Thank you, CEO Kelly. Any other, Paula, did you want to go through your audit plan at all beyond this? I don't think it's necessary unless you have anything else you wanted to say.
I'm happy to answer any questions.
Okay. Any other questions for Paula or for our CEO? Hearing none, again, colleagues, this is a resolution HSRA 21-10, which resolves that the board approves the internal audit plan for fiscal year 2021-22 and acknowledges the internal quality assurance self-assessment fiscal year 2021. Is there a motion for approval?
I move the motion.
Okay, and a second. That was Director Kelly or Williams. I'm sorry. A second, please.
Second.
Correa, we got a motion and a second. All in favor? Excuse me. No, let's just call the roll. I apologize.
Director Schenk,
Yes.
Chair Richards,
Yes.
Director Camacho,
Yes, and Paul, you did a great job.
Thank you, sir.
Vice Chair Miller, not present. Director Perea,
Yes.
Director Guillemette,
Aye.
Director Escutia,
Aye.
Director Williams,
Aye.
Director Pena.
Aye.
Mr. Chairman, the motion carries.
Thank you, Mr. Secretary. Thank you very much, Paula. We will see you soon. Okay, thank you. Moving on to agenda item number 6, our 2021 sustainability report, and our director, Margaret Cederoff. Good morning or good afternoon, Meg. How are you?
Good afternoon, Chair Richards. Thank you. Good afternoon, Chair Richards. I think I'm off mute. Great. I'm delighted to share with you and the board an overview and highlights of this year's sustainability report. At the start, I would like to emphasize, and let's go to the next slide. This is a team sport, both accomplishing sustainability at the authority and pulling together an extensive array of data into a graphically rich document. Reporting is a valuable act of transparency. This report is a consistent presentation of critical environmental, social, and governance indicators year over year. And each year we highlight issues about which stakeholders have been quite vocal or very curious. So this year, the report illustrates a few aspects of how the program is building an equitable future for all Californians. Next slide. Beneath the broad umbrella of sustainability, and solidly grounded in an understanding that Californians voted for this project as a core part of a sustainable future, we have always recognized that we have a duty and an opportunity to deliver this project differently, to evolve infrastructure delivery practice well beyond business as usual. And this report is saturated with evidence of our actions to date, evidence that we are delivering green infrastructure. Next slide. One way we have accomplished this evolution of practice is to use our contracts to progressively advance ESG issues, as shown here. Clear, measurable goals on issues such as small business participation and green construction practices set by the board have advanced through contractor requirements since the start of construction. Data collected for reporting is illustrated where and how it could be most effective to progress these issues and keeps an eye on how the industry is evolving. Later in the board meeting, we're going to have an opportunity to review these topics in greater detail. So next slide. On the topic of progress, 2020 actually provided us with a very clear demonstration that we are delivering the program among global best practice. We received the Envision Platinum Award from the Institute of Sustainable Infrastructure. We achieved the highest possible award using the newest and most stringent version of their rating system. We exceeded that platinum threshold, in fact, by 15%, making us one of the highest scoring Envision projects to date. And we were the largest certified project, both in terms of capital investment and, of course, geographic extent. This is the result of having taken such a broad focus and having committed to ambitious targets and continuous improvement, as well as setting new standards. Next slide. Every year, we consistently report on the same set of information, which speaks to the basic tenet of tracking and measuring what is important to us to manage. This is a slide you've seen before, and it's a snapshot of how the authority is setting a new standard. And it highlights the different some of the different environmental, such as carbon and air quality, as well as social and economic matters that the report focuses on. The report, of course, is an even deeper and more comprehensive dive into these topics, but I'll run through a summary today. Next slide. The authority made an exceptional commitment to balance the direct carbon dioxide emissions produced from our construction activities with projects that sequester or avoid carbon emissions. As you know, we completed tree planting earlier this year, and we are wrapping up a summary reporting, including a map of those projects, which you see here is a snapshot of that work in progress. This will be an online map that you can look to see where the trees have been planted. These trees sequester carbon while providing shade and reduced energy bills in disadvantaged communities throughout the state, totaling more than 140,000 metric tons of carbon. We'll apply the lessons learned from these projects into future projects that offset the next wave of construction. Next slide. Agreements, including the one with the Department of Conservation, are also still delivering habitat and agricultural easements for mitigation. That mitigation alone is of tremendous value, but we also treasure their climate co-benefits, because the more we can protect now and the more carbon we can sequester and avoid now, the better. Chapter 4 in the report details several sites, including native wetland and riparian habitat in the Kings River floodplain, and protection for the Buena Vista Lake ornate shrew at the Lone Tree Mitigation Site. Next slide. Cleaner construction and its consequences is a topic we've often discussed at the board. This positive result shown on the slide illustrates the reflection of the hard work and the dedication of construction staff to achieve compliance, as well as very clear reporting. With respect to equity, the team understands how critical it is that construction practices must be as clean as possible in the places that are already suffering from very poor air quality. When I was last here at the board on Earth Day, we discussed new policy goals and the practical implementation of those goals that will increase the use and uptake of zero emissions vehicles and equipment in future construction contracts, both in the Valley and throughout the state. Next slide. As we plan, design, and build the system, we are incorporating projections from California-scaled climate models into that work. This is crucial. The system is an investment for the next several generations. We know that taking a practical and methodical approach to managing climate risks is detailed in this climate adaptation plan. We also know that the most vulnerable are going to bear the brunt of the chaos that comes with more intense heat and precipitation events. So this is a living document. which means further iterations of the plan will look in greater detail at ways the system delivery, particularly in station sites, can materially improve resilience for surrounding communities, as well as incorporating refinements in climate projections. And this week, I'm proud to say we welcome Kelsey Shockley as a fellow in the Civic Spark program, and her work will focus on communities' equity and resilience. Next slide. For now, that the project is helping lift up workers from across the state and specifically in the Valley with living wage jobs is a fundamental benefit of the project. Next slide. Chapter 2 of the report expands on these benefits, including job creation and training, opportunities for disadvantaged workers, and fostering diversity and equal opportunity. On the topic of benefits to disadvantaged communities, we are reviewing construction jobs information using a more graphically specific methodology to satisfy ARB's cap and trade reporting requirements. So far, we've completed this work for one package, and happily, this analysis is demonstrating that, in fact, 66% of gross pay in the past 6 months went to workers in disadvantaged communities. Cap and trade funding is critical to the project, and this refined analysis provides vital data to ARB and, of course, the legislature. Next slide. The objective of this project is for it to serve as the high-speed spine of an electric transportation network. High-speed rail supported by and seamlessly integrated with local and regional rail and bus and active transportation networks and airports is the goal. The effect of this mode shift will be profound and assist California with vital climate goals, including a transportation system that is more resilient to climate stressors. Next slide. Resilience is also critical at local scales, and this project is happening in communities where the stations can play a role in bridging disconnected neighborhoods and opening up new opportunities. Next slide. The preliminary design work has been focused on providing shaded, comfortable, naturally ventilated spaces that are easily cleaned and that people enjoy coming to access a world-class transportation service. We've continued that work with partners to make sure that journeys are seamless, as you'll see on the next slide. The report takes a closer look at the partnership underway in San Jose, Los Angeles Union Station, Palmdale, as well as throughout the Valley. Next slide. Much of that planning and partnership work is focused at a very granular level and in very specific places, including the Fresno Historic Depot, as well as Fresno Chinatown, where the authority's outreach team has been supporting and participating in several community-focused night market events in Chinatown. Additional planning coordination helps us understand the specifics of what local communities need to revitalize the physical and social fabric of their community, and where high-speed rail can effectively play a role, even in advance of station construction. Next slide. In many ways, these places, the station communities, are how California will derive the most benefit from the system. If we continue to carry out station delivery with the intention of enabling local transit-oriented development, the system delivers on its promise of serving as an organizing principle for growth in the state. And delivering on that promise, realizing infill development within a quarter mile of our station, as shown in this diagram, means shaving millions of miles off the burden of travel most Californians are forced to drive every day, with greenhouse gas emissions consequences all to the good and all speeding our progress towards California's climate goals. Next slide. I'd like to end the presentation with a request. We're stewards of a massive undertaking and have structured our approach to keep all these disparate interwoven actions organized and focused on tangible outcomes and commitments. The sustainability program is a reflection of the values of the organization articulated by our leaders and stakeholders. As we look ahead to the next several years of delivery and even further into operation, we need to know where we should adjust our focus. Later on this year, the team will be carrying out a thorough stakeholder engagement to formally assess the environmental, social, and governance topics addressed in our reporting. We look forward to your participation in that effort. Thank you very much for your time. I know it's been a very long meeting, and I'm more than happy to answer any questions you have, and of course, encourage you to give the report a good, thorough read.
Go ahead, Mr. Chair.
Tom, I think you're muted.
I'm sorry, apologize. Meg, I was just saying you did a great job as usual, and I don't see any questions for you, which means you.
There are two hands up, yes.
Oh, there we go. Oh, we got two. I'm happy. All right, Director Schenk.
Well, let Anthony go first this time.
Okay, I didn't see which hand.
Youth before age.
I was gonna defer to the seniority on the board, but I just wanted to give. First of all, I wanted to just recognize and thank Meg for all of her hard work. Her and her team have produced an extraordinary document here in this report. But also, I had the good pleasure and honor to be able to join Meg. I think it was yesterday or day before yesterday, rather, for a webinar that her team put together along with Alice and the External Affairs folks. Just a great opportunity to engage with the public on this and share some of these highlights and have a good, vibrant discussion about it. So Meg, thank you for that and all the prep and support for that. And also, of course, your extraordinary work here. The recognitions that you've received are well-deserved, and we really appreciate all that you're doing.
Thank you.
Thank you, Anthony. Lynn?
Yeah, I'll just say ditto as usual to what Anthony was saying. Wonderful job, Megan. As we discussed yesterday, there are so many good things that have happened through high-speed rail, and the Envision report, excellent. And there are others, as you and I discussed, across the country. Having served on Fortune 300 corporate boards, I will say that in recent years, the sustainability indexes have become so important. And when they're high on the list, they do everything they can to make sure that it's through the megaphone, if anybody remembers what a megaphone is, not just in the sustainability industry, but also beyond. So doing what you did the other day, plus targeting the legislature, targeting journalists to make sure that they know that we're doing such good work and that our efforts are being recognized on these outside indicators. So thank you again.
Thank you.
Thank you, Director Schenk. Any other questions or comments for Meg? I'll only say, Meg, it's not a great job as usual, but a great job as always. Thank you very much. We look forward to your presentations every year and as frequently and in between as you find yourself on the agenda. So thank you very much. You're a great spokesman for the authority, and you're doing the kind of work that all of us in the state of California should be proud of. Okay. All right. We will now move on to our CEO report, and CEO Kelly.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I wanted to use this report. The good news is you're going to hear more from Meg.
Great.
And less from you.
And less from me, exactly. And so what I thought I would do, I want to jump around in order a little bit because I think it might be best to end with the best, and that's Meg. So I wanted to just cover a couple of things for the board, indicate a couple of sort of reporting issues. And then I've asked Meg to join me on this and walk through kind of a more broad conversation of where we are on the ESG issue, some of the practices that we have at the authority there, and some discussion. It's an informational item, not an action item, but some discussion about how we could bring an ESG score or an ESG criteria to our procurement processes going forward. We have several procurements that are coming up in the next 6 months to a year here, and the idea is to socialize a little bit some of the ideas for how we can incorporate ESG into that work that's in front of us. So that's why she's on the agenda today. I quickly wanted to just update a couple of things I reported to the board before, and I wanted to start with the federal funding picture. There are two slides here in the federal funding update. Go to the next slide. This is one that you have all seen before. There's nothing new in this chart. This is what is in what's called the pending, if you will, bipartisan infrastructure bill that's already passed the U.S. Senate and is pending in the House. And this is several different pots of dollars that I had reported to the board last month that we would intend to compete in for federal funds for our project. And there are project elements in our program, in our project, that these would fit one way or another for us to compete in. For example, if you go down the 1, 2, 3, the fourth row down is RAISE grants, Rebuilding American Infrastructure with Sustainability and Equity. We have RAISE grants pending right now at the federal government. And so these are all areas that we would look to compete for federal funds on. It's mammoth in terms of how much investment is in that federal bill. These add up to on the order of 56.5, 57 billion. And again, we would look to compete in each of these to try to get funding, additional funding for this project. But what I really wanted to update the board on, this is the same box and the same chart we talked about last month. What I really wanted to update the board on is the next slide, which is subsequent to our last report on the federal funding. And the reason I'm here to revisit this issue today is on the House side in the conversations that are not in the infrastructure bill specifically, but in what's called a sort of companion, at least a process companion bill, which is the large reconciliation bill that the Congress is debating now. The House Committee on Transportation Infrastructure approved in that package an additional $10 billion program, in addition to the boxes that are on the first slide, $10 billion in designated high-speed rail funding through what's called the PRIME grant program. That's Passenger Rail Improvement, Modernization, and Emission Reduction Grant Program. And this is good for us because that exceed 160 miles per hour on shared corridors and 186 miles per hour on sole corridors. And there aren't a lot of those in the nation right now. We are one of them. But I mean, this is an opportunity and a pot that we would look to compete in. The full House is planning a vote on this measure. Originally, we thought by the end of September. They had been scheduled for September 27th. It's hard to know a little bit if that will hold because this vote is tied to the infrastructure vote bill. And so we'll have to see what all the negotiation looks like. But again, this is a development that I thought was worthy of reporting to the board, that there is a sizable program that's dedicated to high-speed rail that's now in the House version. And we'll see through the Senate negotiations if it holds. I would just say one other important element to this. There was a rule on the reconciliation bill that entities could not double dip, meaning they could not come into the reconciliation bill if they were being funded elsewhere. And the good news for us is I think there was some agreement between the House and the White House on whether or not high-speed rail was considered a double dip here, and it is not. So we think that's a helpful thing for us to see if this is a pot that will hold, and again, funding program that we can take advantage of. So I wanted to just report this development to the board. Again, we're monitoring what's going on at the federal level. We expect that this and the reconciliation bill and the infrastructure bill will conclude end of September or into October. We continue to watch that closely. So again, that's the update on the federal funding part. Before I hand it to Meg, there were two other, if there's no questions there before I hand it to Meg, there were two other elements of this update that I just wanted to inform the board of. The first one is just that I know the board knows that we have funded through our existing budget what we call bookend projects in Northern California. Those bookend projects are what's called the San Mateo Grade Separation Project. And in Southern it's the San Mateo Grade Separation Project in Northern California and the Caltrain Electrification Project. And in Southern California, it's the Rosecrans Marquardt Grade Separation Project and the LA Union Station Upgrade Project. And what I wanted to report to the board is that the first bookend project has been completed. and that is the grade separation, the 25th Avenue grade separation project in that Caltrain corridor. I think it was last Thursday, Boris Lipkin, our regional director, participated in the ribbon cutting. We contributed $84 million to this project that cost a total of $206 million. But it's a very important grade separation. It was one of the more dangerous crossings in that corridor. And as they electrify that corridor and prepare not just for electrified Caltrain use, but ultimately our use, this is one of the great safety projects that we've relieved. It also involved a rebuild of the Hillsdale station there. So you see that picture. But I just want to report to the board that the first bookend project has been completed. And so that's we're all encouraged by that. I want to report that. And then lastly, just to give the board a snapshot of some look ahead things for us. I had reported at the last board meeting, we had done a construction update for the board, which is a CP by CP review of where we are in construction. We are doing a review of that, adding in some additional risk assessment on that, and I'll be coming back to that board likely at the November hearing, potentially in October, but more likely in November for that full construction progress update. That same hearing is when we come back with the program baseline budget in November. And then the other thing I just wanted to report is that I know there is some eagerness for us to get back into in-person meetings. I've heard that from board members. We're all eager in some way to get back to normalcy. But all of that is, of course, sort of the prerequisite to that is that the public health standards cooperate. And because we've seen some of the hanging on of the Delta variant on COVID, it's led the governor's office and the administration working with the legislature. They recently signed legislation, AB 361, that extended the authorization for agencies to hold public meetings through teleconferencing. It has been passed by both houses, signed by the governor, and an urgency clause was adopted. It really extends that now through January of 2022. So I say that because we will certainly monitor things and pay attention to what's going on, but we do now have an extended ability to continue to do this through teleconferencing and Zoom and use technology as our friend to do our business through January 22. And I wanted to make sure that the board members were advised of that. Again, we'll evaluate things as things continue to develop, but I want to make sure you were aware of that. And we'll obviously err on the side of caution, but I want to make sure you were all aware of that issue. So that's all I had to report in the CEO report. And with that, I wanted to ask Meg to come back in, Mr. Chairman, if that's the issues, our activities in that area, what we do, and some things that we could consider as procurements come before the board going forward. So thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Kelly. Ms. Federoth?
Yes.
Welcome back.
Thank you again for your time. And I'm actually really pleased this morning that you heard from the NGOs who are really leading the way on advancing ESG practices and recognize that our project is really being watched as one of the major public infrastructure projects in the United States. So I'm going to go through these slides fairly quickly, and then I know Brian would like to, and just make a few key points, and then I know Brian wanted to have a good, robust discussion. So environmental, social, and governance indicators, or ESG, is a means of taking this very broad and frankly, for some, fuzzy concept, sustainability, and breaking it down into component parts that can be objectively assessed, refined, managed, and reported against. It's been of keen interest to private sector companies who've either led that charge because of internal motivation for greater transparency on topics beyond their financial performance, or who are responding to stakeholder, shareholder, board, or investor pressure. It has become increasingly standardized over the past decade, thanks to NGOs like the Sustainability and Accounting and Standards Board, or SASB, as well as an organization called Ceres, TCFD, which you heard from this morning, as well as major bodies like the UN and others. It should be a reflection of a specific organization's priorities, though there is growing consensus that the issues must be addressed across the E, S, and G. On the next slide, we ourselves have incorporated ESG considerations across the project delivery, as you heard just now in the sustainability report. Given the scale and the reach of our procurements, we incorporated critical ESG issues that are most relevant to us as an infrastructure owner into those procurements and our contracts. You can see in this list that we focused on key issues like targeted hiring, small minority and disadvantaged businesses, as well as corporate social responsibility practices, and then cleaner construction practices, really focusing on the environmental aspects of how we deliver construction. We've consistently heard from our stakeholders that these topics matter. So on the next slide, while state contracting is very clear on small business participation and disadvantaged business participation as one of the social issues that procurements are evaluated on, for other ESG issues that are directly relevant to us as an infrastructure owner, specifically climate change disclosure, we've taken the initiative with contract performance requirements for disclosure. And I know this might sound a little tepid, but it's had a significant impact. Actually, we were the first infrastructure project to require environmental product declarations, which are a disclosure document about the environmental quality across many indicators for a material. And since doing that in 2014, we were one of the first infrastructure projects to do that. We've actually seen EPDs taken up into state code thanks to the Buy Clean California Act, or AB 262. What this has done is to set up a universe of contractors and suppliers that work with the authority to deliver greater transparency about their company practices and their supply chains. And this reporting over time provides us with the basis for identifying and managing risks within those supply chains. So on the next slide, we're not asking others for things that we ourselves do not do. I spoke about transparency earlier, and this process of reporting and benchmarking serves our management. This consistent tracking and reporting provides a rich data set necessary not only to provide clarity to any external audit or internal audit, but also to adjust the strategies and create evidence-based solutions to move our practice forward. On the next slide, you'll see the indicator set that we've used since 2014, and we do actually refresh this indicator set regularly. We last did that in 2018, and we'll be doing that later this winter, as I mentioned earlier. You can see in it the topics that are material or relevant to us as a public sector program of rail and construction mega projects, which is different slightly from what privately held companies or publicly traded corporations might focus on. So these are topics against we've collected data systematically since 2014, and that's a core body of data to use in evaluating our ESG performance. In the next slide, you'll see these indicators map over very cleanly to a range of external ESG benchmarking tools. The one we've been working with is GRESB. It's a very awkward acronym. It stands for the Global Real Asset Sustainability Benchmarking. As you heard by one of our public comment speakers, it was developed at the behest of major institutional investors, including CalPERS, who, when they were looking at their portfolios and funds and seeing infrastructure assets, recognized they wanted a consistent means of assessing those assets and funds against ESG factors. So we've used this to establish a track record of data and transparency that we hope serves the enterprise over time as new funders, such as public institutional investors, come to the table, or as existing funders start to require this information. And of course, it helps us improve over time. I highlight the example on this slide that, last year we saw a little bit of slippage relative to risk management and our capacity to demonstrate some risk management elements at the enterprise scale. And of course, now with the appointment of Jamie Metalka as the director of risk management, we worked with his group to identify more of the documentation and clarify the practices that are now underway relative to risk management. And we we see this score improving this year in our benchmarking, and the final results of our performance this year will come out later in October. Let's move on to the next slide. I touched on this earlier in the presentation. This to emphasize we have a long track record, of course, of using our procurements and our contracts to address a whole host of ESG matters. And these are a very powerful implementation tool, as evidenced by our performance. These are the issues that are important to us as a public sector body delivering a program of mega projects and using funding sources like Prop 1A, ERA, and Cap and Trade. You can see we're addressing core social issues, but also matters that relate specifically to climate change and how the project can influence delivery behavior toward better outcomes. The enterprise risk management work underway with Director Metalka, and as well the equity, the initiative underway relative to equity data, as well as the diversity and inclusion training and other management activities that Brian was discussing earlier. All of this analysis work will both feed how the authority undertakes aspects of procurement and addresses bidders. And this is a muscle that we've reasonably well conditioned, and we can continue to strengthen it. On the next slide, you'll see that we can, given the principles of continuous improvement, we really should continue our focus on these matters as a reflection of larger policy moves as well as board and executive priorities. We have procurement tools, of course, but as well other tools to enrich the authority's approach to and effectively delivery against and understanding of ESG matters. And I've highlighted a few things here where I know we want to dive into discussion, but I think I'd like to emphasize around the other area, beyond procurement, there's actually a lot that the authority can undertake relative to stakeholder consultation to make sure we are actually tracking the right issues. There's ESG dashboarding that can provide more monthly or quarterly real-time data relative to those ESG matters that are of most relevance and importance to the board. The expansion, of course, of equity considerations, which Brian spoke to, but then working to leverage even greater uptake of ESG issues in our procurement and contracts, as well as educating staff on ESG topics. So on the next slide, Brian explained this was a core focus of the board. Private companies, of course, and other public sector agencies who have different authorities have been adopting some scoring around ESG issues in their procurements. SMUD, for example, requires notes that 2% of the scoring for some of their recent procurements relates to the capacity of an entity to both manage and continuously improve around environmental sustainability for their services. Sound Transit, the major rail operator in Seattle, actually uses an ESG template for scoring as well. I think the authority's next logical move, given the structure of our procurements, is to tighten the requirements relative to environmental and social equity disclosure as a requirement to participate in bidding. We can and we should ask for what our service providers are doing on key topics such as climate readiness, racial equity, and environmental sustainability, as well as how they measure and manage that topic and how they continuously improve. And I think we should watch this space, as we heard from public comment today, as well as really just often picking up the news. This is an area where private companies are continuously uptaking even greater and more granular practice. As a broad range of companies continuously improve their practice, we should watch for how best to adjust our expectations of the companies that we partner with to deliver the system. It was a very quick run through because I know you are eager to maybe articulate some of the items you're most interested in.
Thank you.
Thank you, Meg. Mr. Chairman?
Yes, Kelly, go ahead.
I know we went through that pretty quickly. I think, the intent today was to really make sure the board was informed on what we're doing, see that there are some options in the procurement world for us to, as I think Meg termed it, tighten up a little bit more what we're doing in the ESG space through our procurements. And again, this presentation is to raise awareness on the board about the ESG issues, make sure you know what we are doing and that we're looking at how to do more of this in that procurement space and figure out how to rightly apply it in that procurement space where we are achieving two things. We still got to have a robust procurement process, but we also want to make sure that we're working with partners who see these issues as of equal importance as we do. And so fundamentally, that's what this is. We didn't agendize anything, and there's no action item today. So mostly it was an informative piece here, but obviously happy to hear any comment, but wanted to just use this opportunity to inform folks on what we're doing, what we're looking at. All of our RFPs coming forward to the board, I think is the right time for us to talk about how we're dealing with this issue in those and have the board advise us more specifically on those. But I just wanted to say, Mr. Chairman, that I thought the time was right to bring forth the discussion, and of course, happy to answer any questions with Meg.
Great. Thank you, Brian. Do we have any questions for Brian or for Ms. Cederoth? Okay, seeing none, we will move on, and thank you both very much.
Thank you, Meg.
I wanted to also mention that Nancy Miller is still with us, but for some reason, I got an email from her, but for some reason, her telephone is not transmitting, but she is hearing us. The final item before we go to closed session is the finance and audit update from our earlier morning meeting. I've checked off many of the things that I was going to mention to you because they were mentioned by CFO Annis. And I see on the other items I had and that I was going to bring forward to you, that they really are not materially different from the month before. And with your permission, I'll go ahead and pass on those in reaction to the fact that we've already been going for 2.5 hours. We've got a closed session. So unless anybody would like to hear, I have 4 or 5 comments that I still had open, but none that were particularly different from what I had reported last month, I will go ahead and move on. Alicia, you lit up. Is there something that I should focus on here? Okay.
Not at all, Board Chair.
Okay, great.
Everybody knew our next steps.
Okay. Then I am not hearing anybody objecting to moving on without this report today. What I would also like to do is to apologize to you that I failed to call for the flag and the Pledge of Allegiance at the outset. Thank you, Director Perea, for reminding me of that. And I will do my best to not let that happen again. So with that, ladies and gentlemen from the public, the board is now going to go into closed session. At the conclusion of closed session today, I'll come back and report out anything if there's anything to report, but we'll let you know at the conclusion. My guess would be that will probably be within 30 minutes. We will, for the members of the board, we will start the closed session. It's now 1:33. We'll start the closed session at 1:45, and I think we'll be through with that within 30 minutes. Does that seem reasonable to you, Ms. Fowler?
It does. Thank you.
Okay. With that being, ladies and gentlemen from the public, I'll try to be back to report out by around 2:30.
I'm sorry, Tom, did you say we meet at 1:45?
1:40. Yeah, 1:45.
Okay.
Okay. All right. Thank you. We'll see you all in 10 minutes or so.
Thank you.
Ladies and gentlemen, the California High-Speed Rail Authority Board of Directors has completed the closed session this afternoon. We have nothing to report, and so we will now adjourn today's meeting and look forward to seeing you at our October board meeting. Thank you for joining us, and the meeting is now adjourned.